Today the ds-incubator continues with a series about creating and publishing interactive applications with R, in particular with Shiny. And today I wanted to talk about the basic UI and a little bit of reactivity, just a tiny bit to introduce what we're going to be talking about next meetup. We have already played a little bit with a basic Shiny application, but we haven't kind of really explore the structure of a Shiny app and the patterns that we can see in the code. So the focus of today is to try now move a little bit go more to the code and see what's going on and try to identify some patterns that we can use to build on those and to be able to predict what should I write if I want to do this or want to do that. So to begin with, it's pretty interesting to refresh this idea that Shiny encourages of the separation between the user interface code and the server code. Basically, what the code that generates the HTML that the user will be kind of looking at and will be interacting with, which is the front end, from the back end, which is every code that relates to the behavior of your application. So one quick way to see the bare bones of a Shiny application is to start typing Shiny, and then you will see this snippet if you're using RStudio that is called Shiny app. So I'm gonna do a tab now, and that will populate my empty file with the skeleton of a Shiny app. This is also, in a way, a refresher. So we usually start by attaching the Shiny package. And then notice how there is these two sections here, the UI, which stands for user interface, and that's what I just said is the that will host the code that produces the HTML that the user will be interacting with. So this one is the front end, and then the server function, which is not the focus of today's meetup, is the one that hosts the code for the backend. So whatever relates to the behavior of your application. And then this Shiny app function glues the two together, and Shiny will know how to connect the user interface with the backend based on some IDs that you as a programmer need to kind of provide. So let's dig a little bit into the user interface code. So to begin with, remember that the user interface is just HTML. So if we print, say this function here, fluid page, fluid page itself is just a little bit of HTML text, so there is not a lot of magic in it. And then what we're going to be talking a lot today is about all the different HTMLs, the HTML code that you can generate with Shiny for inputs that the user will kind of provide, and also some HTML for placeholders, so for spaces where the outputs will be kind of displayed on the screen of the user. And again, every single of these input functions that I'm showing now here on the screen, let me kind of walk you through this in a little more gentle way. Let's make this a little bigger. So what we're going to be talking now is about the input functions first, and then I'm going to be talking about the output functions. So I'm now searching for the string input. Hopefully you will start seeing some patterns here. And that is, what I would like to kind of communicate today. So this idea, once you understand how Shiny kind of works, then you are able to, once you learn one or two functions, then you can predict what the third function will do. But then kind of, because there is a caveat here, and I will show you that in a moment. So input functions have a common structure. Depending on what kind of input you want, there will be a prefix. So if you want an input that is a text, then there's going to be a function that is called text input with the camel case name. If you want a slider, then there's going to be a slider input function. If you want a date, it's going to be a date input, and so on and so forth. So that is the first bit of structure that I wanted to kind of communicate. That every function that is an input function has the word input in it, except some weirdness like the action button one. Action button is one other function that allows users to provide inputs, but unfortunately there is an inconsistency in the name there, so it doesn't have the suffix input. But except for those rare functions, most of them have kind of input and then input in the name. So that's the first bit of structure that you wanna probably notice. Because why you wanna notice that is because you can use Shiny column to start and then tab to pop up the tab completion menu that RStudio provides, and then you can start typing something like input. And then you can learn all the input functions that you have there, right? So by knowing what's the structure of the names, then you can basically learn as you go. Another piece of very important information about the structure of the Shiny inputs is the very first argument. The first argument for all of the input functions, let's actually pop up the health file of one of them, say the text input one. And that will be the same for every other function. They all have this ID, input ID, as the first argument. So that is just a string of text. In this case, I used the string name. And that string of text has to be unique because it will allow Shiny to connect the inputs with the outputs through that unique identifier. And we will see how in a moment. So for now, that's just about it. Then there is another argument, a second argument that most input functions have, which is the label, which is any text that will appear describing what kind of input or what kind of input you want the user to provide, and that's free text. So to make this concrete, I'm gonna run this app. This app, all it does is, let me kind of walk you through it so that you kind of start in your brain predicting what's going to happen. This app will only show the HTML that each of these components produces. So if I run this one independently here on the console, you can see how it produces some HTML. Say that I run this other one here. This one also produces some HTML. And then all of these together, wrapped in Fluid Page, will produce, again, the whole page that the user will be looking at. And to make this live, I need to kind of run that with a call to server and then wrapped in Shiny app. So the server function is empty, so what for now, and the focus of this meetup, we are going to be using only, we are going to be playing only with the, or mostly with the UI. So there is no behavior in this app, but once I run it, let's click this button here, Run App, you will see at least what the Shiny app could look like on the user's page. So contain up here, must contain either app. Okay, so I think that what I'll do here, I screw up with the names of the app. Did I?
Just select all.
There you go. Thank you. Right. Now let's pop up the window. Thanks, Jackson. So what happened here, let me explain the error, is that Shiny also has some patterns for kind of identifies the name of the file that from which you are running the app, and the button Run App is looking for a file that is called app.r or something like that. So I was using that button and it was failing, but Jackson pointed that if I just highlight the whole code and run it and source it, then it should work, and it did. So the app that you saw before is the one that we have here on the screen. So I'm going to move this to the right and walk you through it. So as you can see, the first input here that says free text, right, simply generated this field here where the user can input anything, right, just text. The slider is what you expect, is for numeric inputs. There is more kinds of numeric inputs that you might want to allow the user to provide. And if you want to see them all, you can go to the Shiny, to the Mastering Shiny book and see all the options that you have. But here I want to give you just one example of each of the different kinds of inputs that you want the user to provide. So free text, the first one, you can use the function text input. A slider is for numeric inputs. A date input, as you can expect, gives you a little calendar, which is pretty cute. Then the select input function gives you one of the multiple ways in which you can provide, allow the user to provide multiple or limited choices. So this is the drop-down menu is one option, but then there is also like radio buttons as well that people can click on little boxes, and that's another kind of limited choices input that you can ask the users to provide. Then there's this button for file uploads, which gives you an interface for choosing files in your system. And then there is this action button, which is the one that I told you that unfortunately doesn't have the name, the word input in its name. So that's about it for inputs. You are welcome to explore the documentation of Shiny to identify more, the more kinds of input functions that Shiny provides, but the basic types are the ones that are described here. Text inputs, numeric inputs, date inputs, multiple or limited choices, and action buttons. So moving on to the output, so that is so far, we just created a page for the users to provide inputs, but then the users eventually will make a selection, as the ones I was giving in this app here. So say they will choose numeric input 50, they may type something here, they may choose a date, whatever, and those inputs, you will be doing something with them, and then the computations that you create in R, then you want to output them in a placeholder on that page so the user can see what the output is, right? So that is going to be the focus of this second half of the meetup, the idea of outputs. So it's very similar. They also have a structure that hopefully we'll understand. The word output is there in the names. So if I highlight output, you can see similarly to the input functions, there is a suffix, in this case output, so for text outputs, for plot outputs, for table outputs. So these are the three kinds of outputs that I'm going to be showing today, and that's almost everything. There is also the download option as an output, but it requires a different kind of programming. It's a bit more complex, so we're going to cover that in the future. So for now, we're going to be focusing on these three kinds of outputs: text output, plots, and tables, right? Here is again the identifier. So the first argument of each of these functions again is one of those IDs that you already know about. In this case, let's look at the documentation for text output. So in this case, before it was called input ID, now it's called output ID, but it's kind of the same idea. And then that ID, and this is where the the style of programming in Shiny may be a little bit not familiar. It's kind of its own thing, kind of. So the ID that you give to each output function on the server side has to be assigned to. So the structure is the one that I'm showing here. For every output function that you give an ID, there will be an assignment on the server side to that ID on the object output. So this style of programming where you build objects is not kind of, it's totally supported in R, but it's not probably the one that we are more used to programming with. So this in the beginning may take a little while to digest, but then once you get used to it, it should be fine. So let's have a quick look to the app that I have here and see what kinds of output functions we can use and what they look like. So let's start by running this app. I'm going to select the code and run it all. to show you a little bit what we have here. And then we go back to the code and kind of break it down. Here we have the app. Right. So this is a page that we could be kind of showing the user as output. This text string here at the top comes from here, right? So for every, so if you want to create a placeholder for some text, so this line of code that I'm highlighting here, all it's doing is creating a placeholder on the page for some text to live. On the user interface side, so on the UI side of the application, I'm not giving the text, I'm just creating a space for that text to be. So if I go back to the app, the space, all this space here, the white space here, is exactly what this line of code is generating. But the string that you read here, the literal string text, is not coming from here, it is coming from down here. So this is the text that appears there. If I do some other text and run this app, you should see the new text. Ooh, this is, my RC is a little slow today. You should see the new text there. And let's try to identify the structure of this thing. So because we have this render function on the server side that is new to us. And again, this meetup is about the user interface, not so much about the server, but we have to do some something on the server side so that you can at least look at the results of the UI. So this part here will take a bit longer later to understand what's going on here, but we need that code there at least to be able to stare at an app that has something useful. So as you see now, the string some other text appears on the app, and that is because I added it here. So how does it work? Well, okay, so you already know that if the kind of output that I want to create is text, I will be looking at some functions that have the text word in them or similar. And the ID that I created here, so the identifier is called, in this case, some text. That's the ID that I chose for it. And notice how that ID is assigned to, right? We assign into that ID and on the object output. So for every output, we have to build this object called output, and it has to have as many elements as IDs we have given in the user interface. So this, and then what is this render thing? Well, the render is basically we have to actually tell Shiny to identify those identifiers and do the action of so this render text would be the equivalent to in the console called the function print. So we can think for now as being an equivalent for print in the Shiny world. So for different kinds of outputs, you have to call these different kinds of rendering functions. And for example, for plot, right, you need the render plot function. Yeah, so when I created this second line here, which is a plot output, then I need, if I want to show that in the user on the page that the user will be looking at, I need to assign that ID. In this case, I call this ID some plot, right? I have to assign into some plot and on the object output. And finally, the last one here is for a table. So same thing here. Sorry, I'm moving in a very uneasy way. The table output, so I'm creating a placeholder for the table here, and then I am actually printing a plot. Sorry, the table is at the back here, this one. And then I'm printing a table with the render table function. And in a moment, I'm gonna be explaining what this data thing is. But before that, I want to acknowledge that we have reached the 20 past time. CJ is about to kick me out. So I'm going to make a little pause here and ask for, for your questions. And then whatever time we are left with, I'm going to explain this reactive function here. All right, so your questions or comments?
I don't know if this is so worthwhile saying, but my experience is this thing that you're showing today is where things get really confusing. Easily, people ask a lot of questions about it. I get super confused about it. So if you're trying to do this, just hang in there and keep trying.
That's also my experience. It's really easiest to grasp if you do it yourself, how things are connected, and that the inputs are not necessarily connected to the outputs, but that you have to, in the end, prepare one in the render functions, and then output it once. I mean, once you're doing it, it becomes so much clearer.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because the paradigm of programming that the Shiny uses, this kind of idea of reactive programming, is so different to the normal experience of an R user. In the beginning, there's a lot of overhead. We need to think very hard, like how things are connected. But then once you become familiar, all that complexity kind of fades away, disappears, and you can really focus on what really matters. But in the beginning, it does seem very weird. One way in which I like understanding things is by breaking them. So, for example, here I have on the right, I have the outputs. So the app running. Let me put this here to the right, and then on the left I have the code. So see, for example, that the one thing I would like to do now is, for example, to break let's break the plot. So I was trying to teach you that the ID, in this case the word sum plot, is key in connecting the inputs and outputs. So if I change, for example, here the ID, instead of saying sum plot, I say plot, I am breaking the app. What will happen is that Shiny will be looking for an object, for an ID called plot, and we will find nothing. So what I would expect is here on the app to appear just a white space. So let's run that app again and see if that really happens. Taking a little while. Compute. Okay, I'm gonna do is close this and run this again. Okay, so what I expected is to break the plot, and what happened? It looks like I didn't. Plot, server, sum table. Interesting. Sum plot. Okay, I think I'll need to
restart.
To restart. Thanks. That checks in.
Maybe not. I don't know.
Maybe not. Yeah. Well, but that's a good way to solve problems. Anyway, my point is that you can learn by building things one by one, and also once you have something useful, you can learn by destructing things one by one and moving things until you understand how things connect. While I play with this, I'm listening for more questions or comments over there, and then I'm going to explain the reactive function here.
I think I have a comment question very much related to what Constanza just said about, like, I still don't see the like the, how to say it, how the input file relates to the output files, because we didn't have like this plot, for example, in the input file. So I know we will get to this, but until now, like what would you say about like how these two files are related to each other?
Okay, good. No, the file inputs You mean this file here and this file here?
Yes.
Ah, okay. No, sorry, this might be confusing, but no, it is the names of the files there are artificial names that I created just to remember, you know, to show first everything that relates to inputs and then second everything that relates to outputs. So the names of the files are not important except that if you want the app to be clever, what you really want to do is to call the file app.r. So that's the only convention. And maybe I think there is also another older convention by which you can separate the UI in a file called ui.r and the server function in a server.r. I think that's probably the older convention. But these days you can put everything in one single file called app.r. Is that right, Jackson? Maybe you're watching there and you remember what was the convention, or anyone else?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. And I have also been confused by that. And yeah, I will restate that you often see this in examples or like tutorials or something that maybe are a bit old, so it's good to be aware of that.
Thanks.
It depends on where you use the app. Some apps, Shiny apps and stuff, require you to have an app.r that just calls from an app with UI and server. But it's not so you can serve it just with UI and server builds. And then so you can extract them more like separate modules with their own UI and server files.
Probably one comment that I would have as a developer is that in this room we have people with a more focus and interest in technical stuff, and other people are more interested in the concepts. So I think Shiny meets us all in the middle, because for those who are more interested on the analysis side of things and understanding the concepts and communicating the context, all you need to know really is that Shiny is a great tool that we can build for you, so that the people that you interact with, your stakeholders, do not need to know any R to use the tools that we build. So that's just about everything that you need to know about Shiny. And then the implementation details, all these weird things that I'm trying to explain today, the names of the functions, how the inputs and outputs connect, and all that stuff. I consider that a super low level detail that is exciting for me as a programmer, but it shouldn't be exciting for someone who is more on the concept side of things, more on the research side of things, and I don't think you should learn it, to be honest. So let's be clear about that. I think that this is, it's a great tool, but we do have people who are interested in those lower level details. And if you are not, then fine. It's not that this meetup is a statement for you having to learn these things. So how far you get into Shiny is totally up to you. I mean, we do have resources, and the resources are expanding of skills in Shiny, and I'm including myself in there. There's Jackson, there's CJ, there's a bunch of people. There's Olga, have built applications as well. But if you are not seeing yourself as someone who might be writing this code, that's totally fine, and that's kind of expected. But still, the interest in Shiny has been so great that we had to have this meetup here. I'd like to spend
less than 1 minute. Maybe Daisy wanted to clarify her question.
Yeah.
No, yes, is what Constance just said on the chat. Like my question was only related to the names of the files, but yeah, I guess that was it.
Cool. And in the last few seconds, I would like to describe this reactive function here. That's kind of an introduction to the next meetup. So Shiny uses what's called a particular paradigm of programming. It's called reactive programming. And the idea is that Shiny does a lot of things under the hood. You just need to tell them what you want, and then Shiny will do a bunch of things for you. And this idea of reactive expressions is very heavily used by Shiny to save computation. So basically, when the user changes something in the input, some values change. So if the application started with the value 1 in the object X, but then the user interacted with the app and changed that number 1 to 10, then somehow Shiny needs to know that that X is no longer 1, but now it is 10. So and there is some computations that are run in there. So for the purposes of the app that I'm showing now here on screen, reactive the reactive function, what it's doing is saving the kind of computation that you want to perform and doing it only whenever you need the computation to happen and not multiple times. So basically, reactive is a great strategy in Shiny to save computation time, because the applications can get pretty slow if you don't program them cleverly. So in this particular case, for example, all that it is doing is wrapping the code head empty cars to show only 15 rows. So it's doing a little bit of computation. It's not an expensive computation, but pretend that it is. So if we are gonna be using that computation in multiple places, what you want to do is to compute it only once, and then let Shiny reuse the value every time that it needs it. So in this particular case, for example, I'm using empty cars, so this value here, I'm using it in this plot to build a plot, and I'm using it also to create a table here. So I could replace this with that, and recompute the object empty cars for 15 rows twice, but that would be expensive in terms of computation, right? Not in this particular case, but pretend that it is an expensive computation. So the one way in which you can extract that computation and make your Shiny apps run faster is by using very heavily this reactive function and extract the computations in another place. And then the code that you have here could be simply become something like this. So instead of using the data you have assigned here, you just call the name that you created here, but you call it as a function, right? It's a little weird. I know Shiny has a lot of these kind of weird things, but it's not that hard once you get used to it. That's the way it works. Okay, we'll be talking about. Sorry?
It's a nightmare to debug and to find actually where those brackets are missing.
And it's a nightmare to debug. So yeah. So we also will get to debugging Shiny hopefully at some point in another meetup. Okay, thanks a lot. Also, with what we've said today, if you realize that Shiny is, writing Shiny is not very exciting to you, you're feel free to not join other meetups in the series. It is going to be very low level and very kind of detail, technical oriented. So if you want to hang out to learn about those things, do it. But if you want to drop, then you are also very welcome to do it too. All right, that's all for today. Thank you very much, everyone. Unless we have any last comment or question before we leave.
Thanks, Mario.
Thank you.
Oh, good. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Ciao,
Bye.
ciao.